Fresh off the back of his Best Picture and Best Director Oscar wins for Oppenheimer, Christopher Nolan finds himself back in the director's chair once again for his take on Homer's classic, The Odyssey. What did I think about it? Stay tuned and find out. The Odyssey is a mythic action epic based on a classic Greek poem of the same name, directed by Christopher Nolan. The film stars Matt Damon in the lead role as Odysseus, with an all-star supporting cast including Anne Hathaway, Tom Holland and Robert Pattinson, just to name a few. Now, going to this film, I was very excited. Christopher Nolan is one of my favourite directors working today. Everything he does just seems to be on my wavelength. Even some of his lesser films that I don't think are considered some of his best, like say a Tenet, I still really loved and had a blast with. He's just like working on my wavelength. Everything he does just seems to work for me. His last film, Oppenheimer, I think is his best film to date, and obviously that swept up at the Oscars. And when it was announced that his follow-up would be an adaptation of Homer's The Odyssey, the classic Greek poem of the same name, and an epic fantasy, kind of a throwback to the kind of historical epics of the bygone Hollywood age, I thought, oh my god, sign me up for that. That sounds like my cup of tea. And I'm very happy to report that once again Christopher Nolan absolutely knocks it out of the park with this. I just personally love how Nolan always makes his movies his way. Like, he isn't trying to be like anyone else. No matter what kind of films and genres he tackles, he always makes it his way and his style, and I really appreciate that. A part of me was thinking and hoping going into this that The Odyssey was going to be kind of like a throwback to the kind of like David Lean classical epics of like the 50s and 60s, and it kind of is in terms of like on a technical level and how he approached making the movie, you know, shot on film, big emphasis on like real locations, real sets, practical effects. But at the same time, it's not really like a kind of a David Lean movie. It's very much a Christopher Nolan movie, and I really appreciate that. Maybe some people would be kind of wanting more of a kind of a classical approach to kind of this kind of a movie and this kind of a genre, but I personally really admire how whenever Nolan tackles a particular kind of film or genre, he always does it his way and in his style, and so it always very much feels like a Christopher Nolan movie. He is like an auteur director. I love how no matter what he does, whether it is a space movie or a war movie or a biopic or an historical epic, he's somehow able to like tackle these big high concept ideas or these kind of wild, crazy, kind of outlandish concepts and bring them down to earth and make them relatable and accessible and palatable to a modern audience. And I think it's just a testament to Nolan as a filmmaker that he isn't just a really great kind of technical wizard when it comes to filmmaking, and without question probably the best director working today, but he's also so in tune with the audience and able to, you know, make these kind of movies that most people probably wouldn't rush out to see, but he's able to like make it in such a kind of mainstream, accessible and palatable way where people just are flocking to these kind of movies that, you know, haven't really been around for like decades, like an historical epic such as The Odyssey, and people are just absolutely loving it. And I think that just goes to show how great Nolan is as a filmmaker and how in touch he is with the audience, that he's able to make these great technical marvels of films, but also movies that are just really accessible for a modern audience at the same time. Like all his films, I love how Nolan has such an emphasis on practical effects and making the film feel as kind of real and believable as possible. You can tell when you're watching this that, yeah, there isn't massive amounts of CGI. This wasn't filmed on like big green screen stages and sets. You can tell these are actually people in a real boat on the ocean, and it just makes the film feel so much more visceral and so much more intense and engaging to watch, because you can tell that this is real. And obviously there are visual effects employed here and there when it's absolutely necessary, but one of the things I admire so much about Nolan is the big emphasis on practical effects and real locations, and doing as much in camera and practically as he possibly can. And I just think that's what really sets him apart from majority of directors working today, especially the majority of directors making these kind of big budget blockbusters, because it just feels like something we don't really get anymore, because it isn't, and it is kind of like a kind of classical Hollywood epic of the 50s and 60s in that respect, because of how Nolan approaches making the movie on a technical level. We are shooting on real locations. We are doing this all kind of practically in camera with very minimal special effects employed. And when there are effects employed, a lot of the time it is, really old school Hollywood practical effects like puppetry and animatronics. There's a couple of sequences in particular in this film, the scene with the Cyclops in the cave, and then also the Circe sequence that comes later on, that are just absolutely incredible to behold on a visual level because of how it's all done practically in camera with animatronics and puppetry and practical effects. And it's so much better, I feel like, than if there was just massive amounts of CGI and visual effects employed, because Nolan is trying to get us to buy into this. He's trying to make it feel as kind of grounded and naturalistic as possible. So if we had a lot of kind of CGI and visual effects, it would have just felt so cartoony and video gamey and really stuck out. But because the effects that he employs are practical and in camera, it feels so much more real and believable. And as a result, it's so much more intense and overwhelming and frightening to watch as an audience member. Visually speaking, this film is just an absolute technical marvel to behold. The stunning vistas, the cinematography by Hoyte van Hoytema, once again Nolan's regular collaborator now since Interstellar, I believe, shot entirely on IMAX cameras, the first film actually in history to be shot entirely using IMAX cameras. Nolan employed a kind of technique of putting the IMAX cameras in these big boxes so that he was able to shoot the kind of intimate character scenes with the actors talking to one another without the noise of the big, heavy IMAX cameras getting in the way. And the film is just absolutely stunning on a visual level. You really get swept up in the world of the film and feel like you're there with these people. And of course, I've got to talk about the performances from the all-star cast. Everybody just delivers their A-game. You can tell when actors are in a Christopher Nolan movie, not that they're not normally good, but when they're in a Nolan movie, you can tell they really up their game and are delivering some of the best performances of their careers. Obviously, Matt Damon in the lead role as Odysseus is great. I have to admit, I had my apprehensions going in, is Matt Damon the right guy for this part? But he absolutely crushed it. He more than delivered in the role of Odysseus, not just from a physicality point of view, but obviously he is a great actor, and he's not just great in the action scenes, but he's also great in terms of showing us kind of the more kind of thoughtful side of the character and him coming to terms with and grappling with what he's done, the consequences of kind of his ingenuity in the Trojan War with the horse there, and how he's really kind of affected by what he's done. Very much kind of thematic parallels to Nolan's previous film, Oppenheimer. I kind of really appreciate how with each film Nolan has given us in these kind of last several years, he seems to be kind of building thematically upon what he touched upon in the previous film in the following film. I remember there was the mention of, Oppenheimer in Tenet, and then his very next film after Tenet is a film about Oppenheimer. And then with Oppenheimer, it's about this guy coming to terms with what he did creating the atomic bomb, and him really coming to terms with the reality of what he created and how that's really kind of affected the world that he's now living in. And then the Odyssey kind of very much picks up on that as well, with Odysseus coming to terms with and grappling with the repercussions of his ingenuity with the Trojan horse in that war sequence, and how that really kind of affected him, and him coming to terms with what he did there and how that's really kind of affected him on an internal kind of spiritual level. And yeah, there's nobody doing it quite like Nolan. He seems to just be the best there is at making these kind of big budget, action-packed kind of blockbuster epics that are also kind of got something to say. There's something going on beneath the surface that you can really kind of dig deep into and really appreciate as a film fan that really enjoys kind of getting into the depths of kind of what the film is actually trying to say on a thematic level, but they're also just really kind of fun, entertaining blockbuster movies at the same time. And it's not just Matt Damon who knocks it out of the park in the lead role. Like I was mentioning earlier, there's just an incredible all-star supporting cast. We've got Anne Hathaway as Penelope. We've got Tom Holland as their son, Telemachus. Robert Pattinson has a great turn as this kind of snivelling, villainous character who you're just really rooting for his demise by the end of the film. And like I was mentioning earlier, the Circe sequence with Samantha Morton is absolutely incredible. I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with her. She's really great actor, been around for years. I remember when she was in Minority Report 20 years ago, directed by Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise movie, and like Samantha Morton is like the MVP of that. She really kind of steals the show as the precog in that movie. And again here, maybe not the absolute number one best scene in the entire movie, but it is without question one of the best and most memorable moments in the movie is that Circe sequence with Samantha Morton, and she's just absolutely incredible. I won't be surprised if she even gets like a Best Supporting Actress nomination just for that one scene. Also, finally, I have to mention the score by Ludwig Göransson. It's kind of more of an unconventional score for a movie like this. I feel like a lot of people will probably go into a big, historical, epic fantasy movie like this expecting kind of a big, epic orchestral score. But Nolan's approach in this movie was to do something a lot more kind of grounded and a lot more kind of earthy, and I actually really appreciate that. It took me aback because I was expecting more of an orchestral score. But what I admire about the approach they took here, Nolan collaborating once again with Ludwig Göransson after what they did with Tenet and Oppenheimer, I love how they made the music feel kind of more tribal and more earthy. And I feel like that really matched the tone of what they were going for, making the film in more of a kind of a grounded, relatable, accessible way. He didn't want this kind of big, highfalutin kind of orchestral, over-the-top score. Instead, they went for something a lot more grounded and tribal and earthy, and I actually really like that with the woodwind instruments, and it was different from what I was expecting, but I feel like it really worked. And as far as negatives go, I did have a kind of couple of little issues and nitpicks. I feel like the first act was maybe a little clunky. Like a lot of his films, Nolan takes the kind of non-linear approach, and usually that really works for me, whether it's like a kind of Dunkirk or an Oppenheimer, for example, or a Memento, where it really works thematically, narratively, it makes sense, and there's a reason why he's telling the story in that non-linear order. But I feel like with this, it kind of wasn't necessary. I don't think it hurt the movie. I don't think it was bad. I don't necessarily think the movie definitely would have been better if it was just told in a straightforward chronological order. But at the same time, that approach probably would have been better if he made it in more of like an Inception and Interstellar way. Still had flashbacks, but told it in more of kind of a straightforward, chronological, kind of traditional manner. I get that the non-linear thing is kind of Nolan's thing, so I guess he feels like he kind of like has to do that with every movie he makes. But like I said, whereas with a Dunkirk and an Oppenheimer, I think it really worked thematically. I don't know if it was really necessary here, but that was really only an issue with me for like the first 15, 20, 30 minutes of the movie. Once we got to like kind of the halfway point of the movie, the film really found its groove and was really kind of firing all cylinders. So yeah, summing up here, I'm not sure, after just an initial viewing anyway, if The Odyssey is my favourite Christopher Nolan film to date. It is absolutely up there with the likes of Oppenheimer, Inception, The Dark Knight. I would probably, off the top of my head, maybe put it at number 4. But as I said, I've only seen the film once, and it is such a dense film. There is so much in this movie, so much that goes on, so much to kind of get your head around. It is hard to kind of really kind of gather your thoughts and come to terms with what you feel about the movie after just a single initial viewing. But I did still really love the film. I think it is one of Nolan's best films today. I think in many ways it is his definitive movie. Everything he's done in his career, I feel like, has been leading to this point. I'm very much excited to see what he does next. I know there's rumours that because of the kind of horror-like sequences with the Cyclops and with Circe, that there are rumours that he will be doing a horror movie next. And I'm not personally the biggest fan of horror, but at the same time, especially after seeing this movie and those two sequences in particular, I'm very much excited about the prospect of Nolan doing a horror movie, so sign me up for that if that is the case. But yeah, The Odyssey, just a truly immersive, entertaining, blockbuster epic that I really don't get very much nowadays. Really felt like a throwback to the kind of classical epics of the 50s and 60s, but with Nolan's modern approach of telling it in his way, in his style. I absolutely loved it. I'm glad that everybody else seemed to be loving it as well. So there we go, that wraps up my review of Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. What do you think about the film? Have you seen it? And if so, what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you like this and you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to see more. But until then, I'll see you next time.